Hi, I'm Bob Ethington.
And I'm Nick Nicholas.
After we taped this episode with Scott Shephard, who is the owner of Time Traveler Records, Scott suffered a fairly serious health issue. He's doing fine now, we're happy to report, and he'll be back and running the store full tilt, hopefully before long. But currently, Time Traveler is open on Thursday, Friday, and Saturdays. They're located at 118 West Market Street in Akron, near downtown Akron. And again, we wish Scott a thorough and speedy recovery. And this is From Akron and Beyond. And on this particular episode, we're going to take a little trip back in time and then travel to the present and into the future. Talking about a phenomenon that certainly shaped a lot of lives. Anyone who's really been into music over the last, 50 years or so, the record store has played a huge part in really how we've found music, how we learned about music, how we discovered new music. And I think it gets underrated in a way. You know, it's really a 20th century phenomenon that has lived on into the 21st century. There was a period where there weren't record stores at all. I remember of course I'm old, but I remember a long time ago, I would go to like a mall to buy records and they were being sold at a Singer sewing machine store. You know, there wasn't even an actual record store there. And then they became sort of like, I guess, lost leaders maybe at a lot of drugstores and places like that. But eventually, particularly in the late 60s into the 70s, there was a real growth of record stores throughout the country. And, once upon a time, there were record stores all over the place. I mean, any city would have one. Any town would probably have one. As the years have gone on and technology changes and culture changes, there's been a lot of challenges to the record store. But it still exists. But, it's interesting. Akron's lucky. We have 4 or 5 that I can think of. You look at Cleveland, a lot of the most famous record stores in Cleveland are gone now.
We just lost the one in Cedar.
Yeah. Well, Record Revolution closed. Yeah. And, of course, that was a famous one for people. But anyway, I'm just going to reminisce here for a second, and then I'm going to turn it over to Nick and also our very special guest today, Scott Shephard, who is the owner and proprietor of Time Traveler Records on West Market Street. We'll let him tell his story in a little bit, but he's been selling records for almost 45 years.
Yeah.
It'll be 44
Amazing.
Years in April. And he has seen a lot of stores come and go, but somehow he's managed to hold on. It's a pretty amazing story. But as mentioned, I just remember as I started getting into music, I just loved going to record stores. And I think I was always the little pipsqueak, who would go in there. It was like in 5th grade or whatever, and I'd be bugging these, cool dudes that worked there. I always thought they were the coolest guys. Yeah, exactly. I always thought they were the coolest guys that worked in record stores. Eventually, I got to work in record stores, which I did for about 5 or 6 years. I then realized that we weren't really all that cool.
Yeah, I remember before record stores, after watching the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, I bought my first album ever, Meet the Beatles, at a W.T. Grant store.
There you go. Yeah. Now, see, my first album that I ever bought was the first Steppenwolf album. And as Scott knows well, the second album I ever bought was the second Steppenwolf album. And the third album I ever bought was their third one. Now, after that, I started to finally break out into some other music. But when I heard on the radio they played a song from the Monster album, I got excited. I mean, I was like freaking out. And I used to go to this record store that was in this strip mall at least twice a week. I'd ride my bike there, and is it in yet? Is that Monster in yet by Steppenwolf? And I think they were just really annoyed with me. I think when I finally bought it, I think just locked the doors behind me.
Yeah, my second album I ever bought was Question Mark and Mysterians, and the third was Young Rascals.
Scott, do you remember the first record you bought?
I absolutely do. It was Introducing the Beatles, and it's because I got an A in spelling. My dad told me, if you get an A in your spelling test, I'll buy you an album. And I had a lot of 45s already, but I didn't have an album. So, of course, Beatles were my favorite band, and my sister already had Meet the Beatles. So I went to the store, and the only other album you could get was Introducing the Beatles, which was America's version of Please Please Me for the most part. So that was it. And it was exciting to have a full-length album.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Again, I'd like to just sort of point out that it's like, I think particularly not only for fans of music and lovers of music, but for musicians, I think record stores play a big part because that's really where you get to, that becomes part of a culture. You go in, you go in and you get to know the guy that runs the store or the people that work at the store, and you get to know their taste, and as your tastes are developing, you start talking and you ask for recommendations, or you don't necessarily ask. Most people that work at record stores are more than happy to volunteer their recommendations to you and let you know that if you don't buy it, you're a bum.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember the old days of every Saturday I'd drive out when I lived in Ellett, down the street from the radio station, and go to the Kent Community Store. They had like 2 or 3 different locations over the years, and I used to just browse, and they had a great selection of stuff. I knew what I wanted to get, but I would discover other things. And that's the beauty of what record stores were, and even today, you could find stuff that didn't know existed.
Mm-hmm, sure.
And all the guys that worked there could order whatever they wanted. So you had all these different tastes and stuff that you would never find at like a mall store.
Never.
Anything.
Now, Scott, you had a lot of overlap with the Kent community people. Like you knew a lot of them.
Oh, I knew them all. Yeah, I before I opened my store, that was my place to go, and I would pretty much get all my records there, and I became really good friends with a couple of the guys that worked there throughout the years.
Remember Chuck Rutzen? And what was Rebel's real name?
Rebel's real name was Matthew Flanagan.
All right. They were the great guys.
Yeah, they really were.
I remember when the first Bizarros album came out on Mercury, we thanked some people in the back of it, and Chuck was one of them because he really helped the Bizarros a lot.
Yeah, he was really good with supporting artists.
And here in at Summit Mall in Akron, there was Disc Records, and we have had Harvey Gold on a couple of episodes, and he worked there. That's where I first met him, actually. And when I was really getting into jazz and sort of really crazy avant-garde jazz, there was a guy there, Larry Clayman, and he always would recommend me stuff, and I'd buy it. I would buy it, and I almost always liked it and appreciated it, and then would kind of go from there. I'm like, well, if I like this, what else might I like? And so, that's how you could kind of just grow that way. And speaking of jazz, there was a place by Wallhaven called Boogie Records, long forgotten by most, but not by me. I enjoyed it a lot. It was kind of a half record store, half head shop.
Yeah.
What I loved about that place was they had a huge collection, huge section of cutouts. Now, here is something that is a lot of people probably don't even know what that is.
It's a great story to tell.
Yeah, but it's like, it used to be that when albums came out, if they didn't sell enough, if they made too many copies of it, or if they just decided to discontinue a series, they would call them cutouts, which means they literally cut a corner off the cover, or they maybe poked a hole in the cover up in the corner, and then they'd sell them really cheap. Sometimes like it's 99 cents, maybe $1.99, $2.99. And so Atlantic Records had taken out of print almost all of their jazz stuff, and were reissuing them in these kind of generic covers. Which was, I think, a dumb idea. His original covers on those Charles Mingus and Thelonious Monk albums are fantastic, but, they didn't see it that way. But it was great for me because I'd go in there and I'd be able to buy all those original albums really, really cheap. And I mean, oh yeah, that.
Yeah,
I think sometimes I went without like meals because I would go in there and walk out with 25. You know, it's only $1.99. Well, it adds up eventually, you know. But man, yeah, that really opened up my ears to a lot of great stuff.
You know, another opportunity that you had, if you knew where to look, there were DJ promo copies where I think it was like the DJs that weren't really into rock, like the local country station guys, would make some extra money and take their promotional copies that had a big white sticker on it that said, you know, promo not for sale, and
then they'd sell it.
Yeah, there'd be a couple stores. There was Ruth's Hobbies and the old where the tequila bar in downtown on Mill Street is now. Anyway, that was a great way to discover music. You know, Terry Walker and myself really found a lot of great stuff. We got the first Mothers of Invention, first Caravan album, and I mean, they just looked interesting, so we bought them and were hooked.
And that was another thing too, was buying albums based on their covers. Yeah. I remember just going to record stores and just staring at certain albums, with no idea what it would sound like, but just thinking like, I'm going to give this a shot. Just
first
to see.
Velvet Underground.
Well, that's a classic example. Yeah.
Yeah, I bought a lot of albums like that too. I loved it. I would spend hours in record stores because it was just the place to be. And, you know, there are plenty of albums that I of bands I never heard of, and I'd look at the cover and I'd go back and forth in my mind. Should I buy it? And usually I'd end up buying it. And I was usually hardly ever disappointed.
Yeah, they usually worked out for some reason, which is surprising when you think about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. One album I remember that way very specifically is the first Jethro Tull album. This was.
Yes.
Had them all dressed up like, I don't know, wizards or elves or something. Yeah. And then the back cover, it had told you nothing. It just said Jethro Tull, this was. So I didn't even have any listings of songs or anything, but I just kept staring at it, and I'm like, I have to hear this. I have no idea what this is going to sound like, but I have to hear it.
And it was an excellent album.
As it turned out, yeah.
Absolutely.
You know, back to where we were talking about Kent, you know, the Kent Community Store, and tell us a little bit about what, you know, how you got involved. You had a store there yourself, right?
Oh, later on,
yeah.
Way later. The Kent Community Store was gone by the time I bought Heartbeat records off of Chuck Rutzen,
that's right,
who moved to the Virgin Islands, actually.
Yeah, Tropical Island.
Yeah.
And that was in Kent, right?
That was in Kent. Mm-hmm. And it was a good store. But yeah, the community store, before I ever opened a store, I would go out there, and they had a used section where you took a 3x5 index card and stapled it to your used album with the name of the album, the artist, and then your name. And they would keep in the back of a thing for 3x5 cards, and when somebody came up with a used album, they would take the 3x5 card off and put it into their sold bin. And when you came in, they would take 10% and give you 90% of the album you sold. So I learned pretty quickly that I could sell, I could take endless amounts of albums in there, and there was no limit, because they were getting their 10% and I was getting my 90%. So I would just take stacks in there, and it
sounds like a complicated process.
But you know what? It was so easy, and it became my source of income for a while. I remember one time I went to Florida and I came back flat broke, and the day I got back, I went to the community store hoping, I hope I sold a couple albums. And when I got there, I had well over $100 waiting for me, which was a lot. This is in the 70s, and that was a lot of money. That's probably more than I spent in Florida the whole week I was there.
Was your first store, when I first got to know you on Route 8, was that called Time Traveler 2? Or
No. I actually put my address in front of it because it was 4711, and I called it 4711 Records because it was such an obscure location that nobody would know where it was or how to find it. And since I put that address there, that was how they found it, 4711. And, you know, it was across from Buckeye Sports Center up there. I found a house that was commercially and residentially zoned. So So I rented it out and made the living room my record store, and I lived in the back of the house, and it was great. I mean, there was nothing else by it except, Buckeye Sports Center across the street, but nothing, no other retail businesses. And it worked. I mean, it paid my bills and gave me enough money to go out and enjoy life.
And see, this is a good example of what I was talking about, was that normally the retail model would tell you that you want to be in a place with a lot of traffic.
Yes.
But record stores at one time had enough of a draw and an appeal that people almost liked it, that it was kind of out in the middle of nowhere, off the beaten path, right? Don't you think so?
Oh, I think so. It became a destination location. I mean, I'd get people from Cleveland drive all the way down, because I did a lot of advertising in Scene magazine.
Yeah.
Because it was about the most inexpensive way to advertise. And, man, that had a serious readership. And people came from all over the place. I started it with my own collection of used records. I had over 1,000, which was a lot for the time. And I had a lot of imports and a lot of obscure stuff that was worth money. So like a red vinyl Nas album, their second album. And that was Todd Rundgren's first band. But stuff like that, and I put it out, and people came in and they just loved it. My whole setup was crates. I put crates all up on end, and then I put crates of records on top of those crates. And that was my entire, that was all that was in the store were crates and records.
How many record stores after that did like Time Traveler come in?
Well, I moved a few times. After that, I moved up to State Road in the Falls, and I was actually in front of a game room, and then I think they closed down, and I left that spot, and I moved. A big mistake. I opened a store on Front Street, and at the time the road wasn't through, and it is now. But you could only get there and park in the parking deck, and I learned very quickly that not many people did that. So I moved back up to State Road in less than a year, and then I just kept moving to bigger places.
No, that, also people coming from long distances to your stores. And that's, again, this is another phenomenon that's kind of lost now. And in some respects, it's good that it is gone, I guess. In other respects, it's kind of unfortunate. I know I certainly feel nostalgic for it. But, when I was younger, and I'm thinking like in the 70s and into the 80s, it would be a big deal. You have a day off work on a Thursday or a Saturday or whatever. Let's go up to Cleveland.
Sure.
Let's go up and we'll hit the record stores and we'll hit the bookstores, Kay's Books and those places. And, you were going up with a list of things you were looking for, but also once you got smart, you'd realize that you were probably better off just looking to see what might be there, because you might be surprised, something you never thought of. Wow, they have that, And, today that's gone, right? In fact, I think at one point that kind of lost its luster, but you could still go to New York City, and it was still kind of like, well, that's cool. There's going to be all this stuff there you can find. It's not even the same for New York City anymore, really. No. Now it's because everything is online.
The only place that's a destination place are the Amoeba record stores in L.A. and San Francisco. Couple floors of, you wouldn't believe it.
Yeah, but that's legendary.
Yeah, but that's it. They even have bands playing it.
Yeah, but it's the history there too, right? Yeah. So, and then like I worked at Record Theater. There were several record theaters in the Northeast Ohio area, and everyone that worked there had a specialty. And it was like, so there was a guy who was in charge of rock. Yeah. There was a guy I was in charge of jazz and soul. And because that was I was really into that at the time, still am. And, there was someone who was the country person, someone who was the classical person, and we all really knew our stuff. And so it's kind of I don't think that exists much anymore, where a lot of places can't afford to have many employees, for one thing. But even from there, I moved to Camelot Music, and they never really did it that way. But Scott, you worked at both Record Theater and Camelot at one point, didn't you? We never overlapped, but we did time-wise, but I never knew you.
I came in the Fairlawn store where you worked at least once a week for a long time. I loved it, and talking about cutouts, they had a great cutout selection. And it took you a long time. There were so many of them, and they weren't in any kind of order, really.
Right.
And it took you a long time to go through them, but I never left there without 3 or 4 albums.
Mm-hmm.
And, I always asked for a job. The manager always said, we don't need anybody. We're not hiring right now. But finally, the manager of the Talmadge store said, listen, we don't need anybody, but if you're willing to drive to Southland in Cleveland, you can get a job there. So I actually did. So my round trip every day was 101 miles.
Oh, man.
And that's how bad I wanted to work in a record store, which is pretty ridiculous. But I got used to it, and I loved it. And then they moved me to North Royalton, or no.
That's right. I
Well,
think.
yeah, to another time traveler, and they
Or record theater.
Oh yeah, another record theater, and they promoted me to manager. But that's when I realized, I was in charge of ordering rock and imports, and I thought I could easily do this. So that's when I left and started my own.
So you sort of learned the business inside working there at record theater, and that is when you went ahead and started with your own store.
Oh, it was Great Northern. I'm sorry. Yeah,
Oh,
Great
Great
Northern. Yeah, that's. And before that, I'd worked briefly at Camelot, and Camelot, they were nice. They were very nice there, but you could only play a certain few albums, way less than the playlist. And I didn't like the atmosphere at Camelot that much, so I went right from Camelot to Record Theater.
Record theater did have a great selection of cutouts, but so did Woolworth's.
They did. Yeah, exactly. And sometimes you can find really rare stuff at places like Woolworths because people weren't looking for it.
I got a bunch of copies of the first Stooges album for 3 for 99 cents.
Oh,
for $1.
man. Now that's a great deal.
I guess what a sort of a subtext to this whole conversation is the record store experience was more welcoming and inviting to the buyer being more intentional on what they were looking for, right?
Oh,
so
sure,
in other
yeah.
words, it's almost like you really were looking for specific things, but then very open to surprises. And I think that's not quite the same now. I think it's kind of changed today. But speaking of, go ahead, Nick.
What was interesting is what you just said, the experience. I mean, just like last out of the blue last Friday when I was at Time Traveler, and I was a fan of like a lot of the psychedelic bands, and Quicksilver and Jefferson Airplane. Scott and Bob pointed out here's some Jefferson Airplane CDs that are remastered, and they also have like 7 or 8 bonus tracks.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like rediscovering or stuff that you loved. But if you just take the time, and search, and it's fun again.
Yeah, it is fun. I agree with that.
So speaking of changes, I was always going to go into them changes, but I won't.
Forever change.
or forever changes is better.
Yeah,
That's a better change. Okay, we'll go with that one. Scott, you have witnessed personally and intimately all of these changes in record stores, both from being a customer, but then being an owner and an entrepreneur, and then seeing the technology change. So when you first got into the business, I'm certain you were selling vinyl, right?
Oh, yes.
And 45s and albums?
Some, but it was almost all LPs, but a few 45s.
Mm-hmm. And then that would have been for the first close to 10 years, probably you were in business, right?
Yes.
Maybe
yes.
20.
And then when and then CDs kind of kicked in somewhere in the 80s, right?
Well, actually, when I moved from Front Street to State Road, I moved into a rather small store, and I completely dumped all my vinyl and went to nothing but CDs. And I was the first CD-only store in this area.
What year was that about?
That was June 1st, 1987.
Okay, yeah.
And the reason I remember the date is because it was the 20-year anniversary of Sgt. Pepper, and it was the release date for Sgt. Pepper on CD. So I bought, even though it was a tiny little store, I bought a whole box of Sgt. Pepper CDs, and I sold every one of them.
Oh, wow.
And, I had sold my vinyl for really a lot less than it was worth to another guy that had a used store in Monroe Falls. And a lot of it was sealed, and I had some imports. So I sold him probably $5,000 worth of vinyl for $2,000, which I invested in CDs. Because back then, if you went to a bank, they say, invest your money in CDs. I just misunderstood what they meant. I had a different vision.
So that then thrives for 87, 97, 07,
Oh, yeah, all through the
25
90s.
years,
Yeah.
maybe. Mm-hmm.
Well, all through the 90s, CDs were just insanely popular.
So the record labels were making so much money that it was amazing, because everybody that had vinyl wanted to replace, their favorite albums with CDs.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I did the same thing, too.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody I knew did back then.
Mm-hmm. And then you have the bizarre sort of, or bizarro, sort of like reality shift of suddenly vinyl coming back.
Yes.
By the way, we never called these things vinyl.
No, we never did.
Never, ever.
No.
They were records. They were LPs. Yeah.
LPs.
Yeah. I still kind of cringe when someone says, "Do you have the vinyl of this?" I am kind of like, yeah.
Yeah, that's the name everybody uses, though.
Mm-hmm.
But in the early 90s, I still had a bunch of vinyl in my collection, and I thought, I got to get rid of this. And so I started incorporating it back into the CD store. And it didn't sell well, but I just knew there was a resurgence coming. Yeah. So I actually opened an all-vinyl store right behind my State Road store, and it was just like a little over 2 years, or a little under 2 years too early. I just couldn't get enough, customers to buy vinyl. Mm-hmm. And so, after I closed it, within a year, vinyl was huge again.
Yeah.
Bad timing.
That is unfortunate, because if it had been just a couple of years later, you'd probably have more people in the vinyl as part of the.
Oh, absolutely,
yeah. Nick hasn't learned how to turn his phone off yet.
Yeah, that's funny.
That's from Minneapolis.
Oh, there you go.
Paul Westerberg heard we were talking about it.
Yeah, Dylan. Yeah, it's Dylan.
So how many record stores did you have? I mean, how many different Time Travelers? And
Well, I've moved 6 times now since 1980. And I've started other stores. I started a store in Kent when I bought Heartbeat from Chuck, and I kept that for a few years. And it wasn't that it was doing bad. It's just the landlord sold the building, and I had to leave, and I just wasn't really in the mood to go location hunting again, and everybody was used to me being there, so I just closed it down. I took all the inventory back to my Cuyahoga Falls store, and eventually pretty much went through it all. But so I've had the 5 locations for Time Traveler, even though it started off being called 4711 Records, and it's and then that I did Kent. I did one in Hudson, which was a real failure. It just everybody said everybody's got money there. Open one there, but it just didn't work. And my daughter recently opened a store in Cleveland called Shephard Records, which is her last name and mine. And unfortunately, location just didn't work. She had a lot of good inventory, and she had the definite right attitude. People would go in there and talk to her, and they loved her because she was really upbeat, and she had great taste in music, and still does. But where the future of that store is still in question.
Scott, are there a lot of younger people coming in now and buying vinyl?
I get some. I don't get as many as you would think. But all the younger people are obviously vinyl. They don't even look at the CDs. And the thing about CDs, everybody says they're dead, but they aren't in my store because I still have a very deep catalog. And all the stores that open now, they're record stores with maybe one little rack of CDs and not a good selection. So I still have a deep catalog of imports and obscure bands. And so I still do really well. I do about 50-50 with vinyl and CDs.
There's one quick story I want to tell. Around Christmas time, a few of us were hanging around a record store like we do sometimes on Fridays. And a young kid.
We were at Scott's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was probably in his late teens, early 20s, came in and was looking around and had a handful of items to purchase, and we're really nice. We were talking to him. It's the first time he'd ever been in a record store. He was going to Ohio State, and I don't know what class he was taking, but the professor gave him an assignment to go visit record stores and buy something. So I know he just came back from Square Records, and there he was, a time traveler. But he'd never even been to a rock concert, right?
No.
Yeah.
He seemed very confused. It was very Twilight Zone-ish to me.
There's nothing negative about this.
No,
it's just
he was a nice guy.
Yeah, an interesting.
It was like a sociological study.
Yeah.
Like when I was 18, 19, I would have spent untold hours in record stores, not to mention going to shows. And to him, it was kind of like it was just a whole nother world. And he wasn't, he seemed completely, utterly average guy, so it wasn't
very nice.
Yeah, right. So it kind of took us aback. It was like, wow, that's a different world than the one we grew up in, for sure. But your store, Scott, Time Traveler, now it's on West Market Street. And where on West Market? What's the address?
We're right across the street from the Diamond Grill restaurant, 118 West Market.
Okay, so there you are. Right near, there's like a mattress store that kind of shares the building, right?
Yes.
It has a big sign there. But your store now, I mean, I've known you now for many years, and I've probably known you for almost as many years as you've been selling records, come to think of it.
Yeah, you have.
I mean, I've seen the sort of evolution of your store, of your inventory, and now, although you do have by far a larger and deeper compact disc catalog than any other store does in this area, you have a lot more vinyl though than you used to. I mean, there was a point where there was some, but now it seems that keeps expanding and is growing.
Oh, absolutely. And my favorite thing is to buy used vinyl in good condition. And that's a little harder than it sounds because people will bring boxes in and they'll tell you, they're like new, and you look at them and they're not even close to like new, but
scratched.
They're scratched really bad. But there's that rare occasion where somebody will bring in a box and it's really clean and it's like somebody that really took care of their vinyl, and I love that. I'll buy the whole box, and it doesn't happen often, but when it does, it's a lot of fun.
I also think it's interesting how at one point people who were getting into vinyl would complain about how expensive CDs were.
Oh, I know.
But now if you're buying new vinyl, that's way more expensive than any CD.
It is. And they don't seem to bat an eye at that, Oddly enough, my biggest selling vinyl, new sealed vinyl, are Dark Side of the Moon and Pink Floyd Rumors.
Really? Or Fleetwood Mac Rumors, you mean?
Oh, yeah.
And by the way,
Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, and Fleetwood Mac Rumors. Yeah, I'm sorry. But yeah, those, I can count on selling 2 or 3 of those a week, and sealed and new, and they're $24.99, but they don't bat an eye. They grab it and bring it up to the counter, and it's mostly people that have just heard that these are great albums.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've actually witnessed that numerous times.
Yeah, I know you have.
Yeah. You just see a young guy or young woman in there, and it's like you almost kind of like, care to wager here? I think it's going to be Rumors.
I still sell like a lot of Black Keys. I sell on vinyl. They do really well, and of course I sell a lot of Beatles still. But yeah, Rumors and Dark Side. It's crazy. great albums, but
Yeah.
they've stood the test of time.
And I guess they've just become maybe emblematic of that era or something, like, kind of like maybe Sgt. Pepper was as well.
Oh, right, yeah. Well, I heard recently that the album cover artwork for Dark Side of the Moon is the most recognized piece of art on planet Earth.
Really?
So maybe you should Google that if maybe I'm wrong, but I've heard that. And I think that's really cool.
And then I read somewhere where Roger Waters of Pink Floyd, it's been reported that he's re-recording Dark Side of the Moon in its entirety. And the reason he gave for that is because he thinks people didn't get it the first time around. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah. We didn't sell many of that album, so I'll put it out again. Yeah, I don't even
Or
know
they
what
didn't
to think about
understand
that.
it, which is even weirder.
Yeah.
Nick, do you remember going up to Cleveland and some of the experiences you would have had there?
Yeah, I just mainly though, like
I always hear about that Hideos
Discodrome.
Yeah, tell me about that because I never really went there. That kind of predated me.
It had a couple different locations, but the one that was at the most, Lake, I can't think of the name of where it was, but it was a great store. It was run by Johnny Drummett and staffed by a lot of local musicians like members of Perubu and the Pagans. And it was an adventure going there because they always had the latest. They were mainly in the 45s that people were buying back then, like all the British imports, like the Sex Pistols and all the various English punk bands, and they had a lot of independent stuff, And they as small of a place it was. They every once in a while they'd have a band that would release a 45, and they'd do a performance at the show in the shop.
We talk about the hipper than thou record store staff. I think I would have been pretty terrified going in and David Thomas being there.
Yeah. I remember one time when they actually got a phone call from Seymour Stein. Left a message. He wanted them to send him a copy of the From Akron album because he was interested in the Rubber City Rebels.
Oh, wow, okay.
And then Dave Thomas, lead singer for Perubu, was always a little bit of a smartass, really good guy. But and then he scribbled a message to Thompson, the owner. Yeah, and Clive Davis called about the Pagans.
That's great.
Anyway,
Record
but
Revolution.
besides time travel, I loved going to the on Britain Road there in Akron, Quonset Hut.
Yeah.
Because they had a deep catalog.
Yeah, they
everything
really
you
did.
ever wanted, it was there.
And that's yet another great example of the amazing, and I'm not just saying this because you're an old friend of mine, Scott, but I mean, it's an amazing thing, your longevity. Look at all these stores that we're talking about that they're gone. Disc Records, gone. Record Theater, several of those all over. That was a chain. They're gone. Camelot Music, gone. Recordland, gone. Quonset Hut. I used to really like Quonset Hut. When I worked for the library at one point, I worked. There was the temporary site of the main library that was in the falls, and on my lunch break, I'd have just enough time if I felt like it to run over. It was only like a block away, and it was a cool way to spend 20 minutes or whatever. And yeah, it was a cool store. So gone.
I know, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of money behind those ventures. Scott was just one man. He's still here.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. Some think I probably shouldn't be. It's not what it once was, but I just love it. It's what I've done for so long. I mean, I can't imagine, doing something else at this point.
Yeah, sure. Nick, were you going to say something about Record Revolution, or did I?
I was.
Oh, you
Yeah,
were.
yeah,
Okay,
I
go,
was.
Scott. Go.
I just loved that store. That was another place I would go once a week before I had my own store, and I'd go down in the basement, and they had more used albums than 10 other stores combined. It would take hours because they were stuffed in there so tight to go through all those. But I always found a stack of stuff there every time I went up. And, it was just a cool destination. And I loved, the whole scene up there, Coventry Village. It was just really cool. Lots of hippies and, stuff like that. But it was a great place.
Oh, no, it was a lot of fun.
And now they're closed.
Yeah, I know. I think I think in all honesty, that store had kind of faded over the last decade. It really wasn't worth going the trip up anymore for the last 10 years or so. But when it was great, it was, really fantastic. And I think a lot of people were sort of nostalgic when they heard that it had closed. Because, you'd go up there and, I remember that basement because there was, because they were kind of like maybe in roughly alphabetical order at best. So it was, you really had to be dedicated to dig through that stuff. But, and then, it was like Tommy's restaurant you could go to, and there was a couple other cool little shops around there too. Plus, I always thought it was hilarious that there on the corner was a Communist Party bookstore that was never open. I just found that sort of emblematic of something.
That's great.
Every now and then, I kind of want to go in. I kind of thought, I'll buy some weird, thing on Marx or something. And it was like, it was never open.
That's right. I used to see you banging on the door up there. Who is that guy?
Oh, boy. So I feel like we've covered this topic pretty well, at least the sort of the past into the present. Part 2, we're going to kind of talk about the present going into the future and sort of the issues with vinyl scarcity, the scarcity of plants, and the price that we've discussed, the very elevated cost of that, and just how sustainable a market that is in the future. Scott and I have often said that we both think that there'll be a CD revival eventually. And so, you hold on to that stock.
Oh, I know. No, I think, if 15 years or more ago someone told you there was going to be a vinyl, resurgence, people say, no way. I put mine on the curb. So many people told me that. Yeah, I put all my albums out on the curb, 20 years probably or more ago, but that wasn't a wise move.
No,
I think CDs are going to come back just as well.
I had made a similar faux pas when I lived in Highland Square, and we moved to a house when my wife and I, and weirdly, those old houses in Highland Square had more room than the house that we bought. And I had, from working in record stores for a number of years, I had like virtually an entire bedroom filled with albums. And I kept a couple of boxes of them, sold off the rest for way too little money. And I had all this cool promotional stuff that I wish I hadn't brought that up, because every time I think of that, it makes me ill.
Well, I kept all of my LPs. I still have.
You? Good for you.
But I sold my vast collection of 45s, and I did really well on those though, because they were some of those were pretty rare.
Well, I think one of the reasons there's going to be a CD resurgence is what we talked about earlier, all the deluxe sets and bonus tracks that you get, and you just don't get that on vinyl. And if you love an artist and you can get like an entire CD of songs that have never been released, you'd be crazy not to get it.
We're talking earlier about some of the bands that you love that. Oh, the band Love.
Love, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I found
Arthur Lee.
Yeah, I found various CD releases that I didn't even know existed. Live and.
Yeah, I try to carry everything I can get on that band.
Yeah.
They definitely stood the test of time. And
you have deep catalog on like 20 or 30, well, probably more.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
If somebody loves a band, they come into your store and they'll find stuff that they didn't know the band ever released.
Yeah, that's the plan. I got to get these people hooked. Yeah.
Well, and another good example, real quickly, of this is you guys may know I'm a very big Bob Dylan fan. Well, when they come out with these bootleg series, it's like the the CD collections of those are like say like 5 CDs, and you're getting probably about 6 hours of music, and they're not cheap. But if you want to buy that on vinyl, it's like exorbitantly expensive.
Yeah.
I mean, because the 5 CDs turn into 12 LPs. It's like hundreds and hundreds of dollars. I mean, who can afford that?
They're still releasing them, so somebody's buying them.
Yeah, but I think more people buy the CDs of those. Yeah,
Definitely, yeah.
Come and gather round, friends, and I'll tell you a tale. For there ain't nothing here now to hold them.
Well, anyway, Scott, we want to thank you, Scott Shephard, our
thanks for
special
having me.
guest.
Thanks a million, buddy.
It's been an absolute pleasure. I love it down here.
Okay, yes. The Summit Studios are a terrific place to be.
Yes.
And we'll have a part 2 next, and then we'll be pursuing some other subjects and other special guests in the future. So this has been From Akron and Beyond. I'm Bob Ethington with my co-host, Nick Nicholas. Thank you so much for listening.